origin stories in intergroup dialogue, telling your narrative, telling your story is how people connect and begin to understand how their own identities and how, by listening to others, their identity experiences are different and starts to illuminate understanding about the world around social justice. And that's still my heart. Dialogue work is, to me, the way that I go about making change in the world. People who are having such an influence on students absolutely need to be doing that work themselves. And we at the college level need to be doing that work ourselves too. Um, I think one of the important principles around intergroup dialogue is that I would never ask students to engage in a process that I am not willing to engage in myself. The transformation and awakening that I saw in students, um, not necessarily every day, but every semester, I definitely saw that happening, and to a variety of students from a variety of backgrounds and identities. So that was for sure, that made it worth it day in and day out. In talking with alums,
Yeah.
I hear that all the time. I just heard from someone who is now a physician. She started out as an undergrad, and she just messaged me on LinkedIn talking about how she's developing a kind of a professional development thing for her physician colleagues. She is utilizing some of this dialogic kind of work in her work with other physicians. I love hearing how even years later, this is still something that people are thinking about. And not just thinking about, they're utilizing it in their work and in their life. Dialogue that is devoid of understanding the power dynamics that are happening
Yeah.
is not the kind of dialogue I'm engaged in or want to be engaged in. I think there's a total missing piece to pretend that everybody that comes to this room to discuss something difficult has the same amount of contextual power behind them or even in the room, the roles that they have, on the identities that they bring, the histories of those identities that all enter the room. And if we're not thinking about that, it's not happening the
Mhm.
right way. It
Mhm.
just doesn't. And as facilitators of those conversations, if we're not thinking about that, then we're facilitating a discussion. It isn't dialogue.
Yeah.
And not being reflexive of our own stuff too, then really we've missed the point of facilitation in dialogic context.
Mhm.
But many people have asked me, so why did you go into like more full-time administration? Because I don't have those, oh, like see it. I see you struggling and then I see you like making sense of what this, and that's so exciting to see that. And I don't get any more. But I have a different opportunity. So I think I now have the 30,000 foot view of higher education and policy and the impact that can have on many lives. I have appreciated being able to have a larger impact, even if I don't quite see the benefits firsthand. It's being in a position to remove the barriers and see what's possible and say yes
Mhm.
to removing those barriers. That's very rewarding. I have this earring that I've had for 30 plus years, and it's a woman's symbol, and I wear it every day. It symbolizes I am not a radical. I work in an institution of higher education, but this is my little reminder to myself every day, and I can always touch it to say, I have to be the one that says the thing in the room, or I have to be the one that asks the question of why are we doing it this way? It's so minor. Most people would never even notice this little earring. But for me, it's like my non radical way of reminding myself that I've got to stay engaged. I've got to do that. And so that's my little reminder to myself. And I think it is related to my son and my hope and aspiration for the future, that it's better.
This is Social Justice Origin Stories. I'm your host, Rolando Thompkins-Jones. Social Justice Origin Stories is a storytelling project that highlights personal stories and defining moments that have inspired individuals and organizations to labor for equity and social justice. Through truth-telling, the honest sharing of their experiences, storytellers teach us about themselves, enabling us to learn about ourselves and our world through their stories. By reconnecting with pivotal moments of activation in their lives, they invite us to do the same. At Social Justice Origin Stories, we believe that there's power in storytelling and lived experience is experience. There's room enough for all of us to do this work. There are many ways to contribute, and our contributions don't need to be the same. We can enter and remain engaged in the work using the gifts that are special to us while supporting others and using theirs. We have the capacity to grow and change for the better when exposed to new information and experiences. We believe in our inherent worth and capabilities, and we possess the power to inspire and create change in ourselves and others. We can transcend the confines of the status quo to imagine and design more equitable and humanizing systems. Today, we're joined by Kelly Maxwell. It is really my honor to have you here, Kelly. I've been saying this as I've been introducing folks in just terms of the storytelling of this project, the first phase of this. And I believe I've told you this too when we were meeting about it. In terms of even asking folks to share their stories, to come and share for this first phase of the project, they really involve going through this sort of cathartic, in some ways therapeutic exercise of looking back over the course of folks I've met in my life who've inspired me, who have encouraged me in different ways. And so I was so happy to write in your name, Kelly Maxwell, there, just because I really appreciate you as a person, but then also just your consistency. Intergroup dialogue has been such an important part of my life and development. And I've just appreciate we've been able to remain in contact. And then sometimes we're off and we're doing our work, and then we meet up again and we catch up with one another. And so there's something really important and really sustaining about that. Knowing that you are doing the work that you're doing, that you are doing it with the lens that you have, with the care that you have, it inspires me. It motivates me. I'm honored to be in your orbit. And so thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. And Rolando, the honor is mine. Origin stories in intergroup dialogue, telling your narrative, telling your story is how people connect and begin to understand how their own identities and how, by listening to others, their identity experiences are different, and starts to illuminate understanding about the world around social justice. So to be able to talk with you today is truly an honor. I really appreciate being here. So my current role is Senior Assistant Dean for Undergraduate Education in the College of Literature, Science, and the Arts at the University of Michigan. That means I am involved in day-to-day operations around working with units that are engaging students in high impact practices. So those things that are going to help them make meaning of their undergraduate experience. And I've been doing this work for about 6 years. But before that, I spent 17 years with the program on intergroup relations. And you've already mentioned intergroup dialogue. And that's still my heart. Dialogue work is, to me, the way that I go about making change in the world. In that work, it was about bringing students together and training student facilitators to talk with one another in a really structured, interactive way, and particular process that we take students through across a semester, engaging with one another about tough issues, not just of identities, but looking at issues of privilege and oppression and stereotyping and discrimination, all through a dialogic lens. So teaching them the skills to do that. And then I still get to do that because I'm the board chair of something called the Difficult Dialogues National Resource Center, which is a national organization that works with colleges and universities to bring teaching and learning about dialogue to those campuses. So even though I'm not doing that day to day anymore, not in the classroom anymore, I am still able to connect that piece that has been so meaningful to me. And you'll probably hear in some of my origin story, the thing that sparked me to find this path toward dialogue and social justice.
All right. Well, thank you. So, as you reflected on your social justice origin stories that you want to share with us today, some of the things that came up in terms of what you might want to talk about were coming out and the implications of that on how you understand your whiteness, family dynamics of being in an interracial, multiracial family with two moms, and what that means for your life.
I grew up in a really small town in Ohio that was predominantly, almost exclusively white. And so I did not have a lot of experiences with diversity in terms of racial and ethnic diversity. The big divide in our town was around having a Catholic high school and then we were a small town, so a public high school. So Protestant and Catholic issues were probably the predominant thing that I learned about as a teenager or throughout my life growing up. So when I came out as a lesbian in college, and this is the early 1990s, it was really profound to think about, what do I do going back to my family, and what does that mean for understanding myself as a minoritized person? Because even though I'm a woman, I hadn't really thought about identities in that way before. I'd never had classes that had a language around that. And I had a lot of privileged identities where I could skate through the world and not think about it. So coming out was really, for me, an eye opener to be on the minoritized end of things and to think about, okay, now that's in opposition to what does it mean to be heterosexual and the privilege that comes with that. And from that, it really started making me think about my whiteness from that privileged identity that I was now seeing in contrast because of coming out. I had this contrasting viewpoint to see privilege and oppression. And then I switched it and was able to see privilege and oppression from my privilege lens too. So I think throughout the 90s, as I was exploring that, and I was in student affairs at the time. After college, I went into student affairs work, doing what we called at that time multicultural work. It allowed me the space to really open up and explore that. And then I went for a PhD, and being in Arizona, at Arizona State University doing that, it really shaped a different way of looking at racial context. Because I'd grown up in Ohio, I'd spent the first part of my career in the Southeast of the United States. Definitely, if I'm thinking about racial context, it was a black-white binary, and that's all I
Mhm.
knew. And then moving to the Southwest, it was like the black-white binary doesn't exist in the same way as it does east of the Mississippi, for example. And they say that psychologists sometimes will study the very thing that are trying to work out amongst in them.
I see.
Not a psychologist, but I was in education, and so my dissertation is really trying to work out understanding, and my dissertation was white faculty teaching multicultural courses, identity and implications. And by viewing this from a researcher lens, I was also doing a lot of reflexivity of, what does this mean? Can this be part of my life? Um, is it right for white people to do that kind of work in front of others as a faculty member in the classroom? I would say at the same time, in my PhD program, I also found intergroup dialogue. I was mentored by a tremendous person, Dr. Jesus Trevino, who
Mhm.
introduced me to intergroup dialogue. He introduced me to the Michigan model of intergroup dialogue, even though we were in Arizona. It changed my life because telling those stories was so powerful. It's in many ways, it's how I learned by listening to others. It helped me develop skills to do that in a way that was really genuine and authentic and in an inquiry way, as opposed to tell me more, demanding kind
Yeah.
of way. It was
Yeah.
more like, you know, let's mutually share with one another. And build an understanding from that. So those are some of the pivotal early moments in my professional career that certainly also were part of me personally, is how I grew to understand many of my both privileged and minoritized identities.
I appreciate hearing the story of how you came into learning about intergroup dialogue. And I think of you and our other friend, Roger Fisher. I think of you both often. Like I said, we don't have to talk every day, but I appreciate you both in different ways and carry many of the lessons into my own work and thinking about the ways you all talk about multi-partiality and so many things. I just wrapped up, of course, with a friend of mine, Catalina Ormsby, our 11th year of doing it. And yeah, thinking about you all as we were relating to the students. I didn't have that context from you. So I'm so happy to hear you share it, how you came into it. In some ways, it's like a full circle thing. So thank you so much
Yeah.
for sharing that. And so you were introduced at that time by your mentor, this professor that introduced you to the Michigan model. And then you also mentioned you had questions around, is it okay for a white person to do these multicultural courses? What are some of the conclusions that you came to at that time? And what are your thoughts now about it?
I think one of the biggest conclusions that I came to is doing it purposefully. I did this 4 case study approach, and one of the things that I noticed is that there were faculty, white faculty, who were teaching like out these issues without being in it. It was more like positivist. I'm not in it, and I'm objective in this, and I'm going to give you information. Um, And what I recognize is that doesn't work for me. I bring who I am to even courses that aren't dialogue courses that I've taught over the years. That doesn't mean that I'm centering myself, but I want to make sure that I am thinking through when students are going to say stuff. What is the little trigger in the back of my neck, the little hairs going up, and how am I going to respond? Because I know I've had a similar story or I've had such a vastly different story, that sort of thing. So being present with whatever the content is to know how I fit with that content. If I am more of the privileged person in relaying some amount of content, what does that mean? How would a different person with different identities relay that same content? And really just thinking that through. I can't answer that. I don't know for sure how somebody else would deliver some kind of content, but I just need to be intentional in thinking it through and not just say, okay, here's my content today, blah, 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 blah. So I think that's one of the major takeaways is just being purposeful, especially when you have privileged identities, because any privileged identity is such because it's so normalized. And I don't have to think about it if I don't want to, or if I don't make a conscious choice to do that. And
Mhm.
so my life, I have chosen to, as much as I can, make that conscious choice to be thinking about the impact that my identities are having on other people or on a situation. Sometimes my wife will say I get too far in my head. Don't overthink it, but I would rather that than not be thoughtful at all.
Yeah, did not be thoughtful at all. And in your sharing there, you also, I feel like you highlighted a distinction too. So, and again, I'm paraphrasing. So I'm seeing white people in teaching multicultural courses, but talking about it in a way as if they are somehow disconnected from
Correct.
all of the things that we are talking about. And it sounds, hey, and in your approach, no, I'm in this too. I'm a part of this too. I
Yes.
have a particular lens that I'm bringing, and that's influenced you as an educator.
And
All
that's right.
right. So you learned about the Michigan model while you were out in Arizona. You were getting your PhD. Tell us more about how that connects to when you came to Michigan, or what happened after that point in terms of your origin
Yeah.
stories.
Being exposed to intergroup dialogue at Arizona State made me want to do this work. My PhD is in educational leadership and policy, and I thought going in, I would do some kind of education policy. But I quickly realized throughout my program and working with intergroup dialogue that I really wanted to do something along the lines of intergroup dialogue and social justice education. And in the early 2000s, there weren't a whole lot of options. There was Michigan and maybe a few other places. And so stars aligned, and there was a job opening as I was defending my dissertation. And I applied. And being from Ohio, it was like, wow, coming back 2 hours from my hometown, that would be something really special because I had lived pretty far away since after college. And so I tossed my hat in the ring and made the case and got this job with the program on intergroup relations. I used to say when I first got the job, what do you do when your first job after your PhD is like your dream job? Like, how do what do you do with your life? So I just went all in and stayed there for 17 years. First as an associate director and then as the academic co-director of the program. And in that time, because dialogue was meaningful to me, not only in my work, but in my life, I also joined an LGBT group in the Metro Detroit area called Race Matters. And it was this group of folks that would meet in people's homes once a month for a potluck and a discussion about race and ethnicity and other identities too, but race, especially in the LGBT community in the Metro Detroit area. And that's where I met my wife. She was in that group, and she's a Black woman. Got to know each other from that. And actually, I asked her to marry me during one of those Race Matters meetings. So
Beautiful.
it's funny how dialogue brought me together with the person that I am with today. I love that story because it's like who I am. The dialogue piece wasn't just work.
Yeah.
It's life. It's who I am, who we are together as a couple. And so that's how I got to Michigan and then got to be in this interracial relationship. We've now been together 22 years. Yeah.
And and those earlier experiences and the storytelling that you were just sharing, how does that connect to how you are doing today in your everyday work and your everyday life?
I think I I tried to be consistent across the various pieces of my life in terms of who I am. I don't think I show up differently at work than I do in life or in my faith community or my community activities. I'm really trying to foreground social justice issues. The things that I'm involved with outside of work almost always have some kind of social justice component. It was very hard to find a church in 2003 that would marry two women. And so finding a faith community that lived its values around LGBT issues, but also around race and ethnicity was really important to us. And so staying connected all of these years with the faith community that lives those values too has been really important to me and to us. Once we were married, we decided to adopt, and we wanted to find an agency that would obviously work with us as two women, but also not reproduce some of the dynamics that I think occur in the whole adoption process. We were very clear to work with a group out of Chicago that was working with Black moms and had a good support system for birth moms. And also on the flip side, they were working with all different kinds of couples, different orientations, different racial groups. Given that all of their kids were going to be kids of color, they also had racial identity training for all of the parents going through if they were white. And so that meant something to me too, that we were working with an agency that was thinking about and conscious about the impact of Black children or biracial children going potentially with white families. And in our case, he came to an interracial family, but it was important that they were thinking about that too. It wasn't just, here's a kid, I'll never
Yeah.
talk about race again.
Yeah.
No, I was really glad that the agency that we worked with was not taking that kind of colorblind approach, which I think would have been very problematic.
Yeah. They saw it as a priority and they recognized there are different dynamics at play here. And it's important that we provide this so folks are in conversation about it and not ignoring that race matters and that it exists and it has implications for this relationship.
So I think that's an example of how I try to be consistent across these dimensions of my life and not just, I'll give up my values in this case so that whatever can happen. No, this was really important. And so we did it through the adoption, we do it through my community or through our faith community, through my work. I am still constantly thinking about and checking my white privilege. So I don't mean to suggest I have it figured out by any means, but to me, it's a lifelong process. And I tried to be all in on that process throughout my adult life since I started having these awakenings in the 1990s.
You mentioned an experience about your son. He was in sixth grade
Mm,
and
yeah.
some things you were noticing in these experiences.
Yeah. Another time when it was important for me to take some action. So again, he's a Black kid and he went through elementary school, no problem, went to middle school and he crashed. His anxiety level rose 100% and he was not able to go to school. And we were trying to figure out what was going on. Um, and when he was at school, he was misbehaving because he was so anxious about being there.
Mm.
I could look back and recognize what was going on a lot more clearly now, but we were so stumped. The thing that was the straw for us was he was in and out of school, going, not going, because he just couldn't do it. And one day near mid semester, he and about 30 other kids whose names were readily identifiable as Black and brown kids. Their names were read out over the loudspeaker to the entire school to come to the office for their ongoing disruptive behavior. And I was just like, oh, hell no, this is not going to be happening. Not just my kid, but what's going on with this whole group that maybe they are disruptive, but why? Why is
Yeah.
this is a structural issue. This
What
isn't
is it
an
about the
issue.
environment?
Exactly. What is happening here that it's just this group? Our niece was going to the school at the same time, and she said when they read those names, she recognized she's in a different grade. She heard their names called out, but she recognized those are all the Black kids. So the whole school knows who these kids are. It was to discipline them. So I went to the school board. I spoke in front of the school board and of course, talked to the principal. We were already engaging with other social work services at the school. They were good, but the institutional piece was beyond just my kid, and
Yeah.
it was wrong. And so I don't know, we ended up pulling him out of the school and finding him a different school that would meet his needs and reduce his anxieties. To be honest, I don't know the actual steps that they took, but I do know that after that year, this vice principal who was engaged in this disciplinary process was not in that role. I was hoping that I was a catalyst for some kind of change that then occurred. Um, but yeah, it was really painful. And this was, I think I've had a couple of these moments throughout my life. When is it okay to use my privilege as a white person to benefit, in this case, was my family, but and other people of color, because it was a larger structural issue.
Yeah.
I feel like I have a responsibility to do that, um, to name things in ways that maybe wouldn't be listened to if I wasn't white. But I do think about it. Is it ever right to use one's privilege, even in support of social justice? Clearly, I've come down on the side, yes, it is. I think there's people who would argue with me, and I would respect that. But I have chosen to try to, when I think I could make a difference, I will speak or act using that privilege to try to make a difference.
What's the purpose behind that? What's the rationale behind that? Is this something that would be done for white students in the same ways? Have you done things like that? And so when I'm thinking about it, as I'm hearing you share, I remember you talking at an earlier point about the importance of when you all were adopting to provide some education around recognizing race and racism, anti-racism. And I'm also thinking about how important that is for educators to undergo that same work. As you said, I don't know the steps that they actually took. The person who was in charge at that time, is no longer there. But recognizing that this is impacting our son, but then also there are other kids that are involved too, and we need to make this known that this is a problem. This is your story, but I'm also thinking about just folks through intergroup dialogue that I'm really appreciative of. You may remember her name is Shayla Griffin, Dr. Shayla Griffin, who does a lot of work around race and understanding racism in schools and the impact of that and using intergroup dialogue and researching things. When I was learning about it and doing my MSW, my work was facilitating dialogues at Huron and at Ann Arbor Tech now, was called Stone at the time. And so just recognizing the importance of educators to be engaged in this work too. Yeah, everybody, every profession needs to be ongoing engaged in recognizing the impact of systems like white supremacy and others and how they show up because they impact real lives.
I had an opportunity to work with Dr. Griffin to do some training in one of the school districts, and she took it off and did it for many years after that. In this case that I just described, I
Yeah.
did told them more about my credentials and that I'd be happy to bring in other people and that we could do some training. And they didn't take me up on that at the
Hmm.
time. Well, but you're absolutely right. People who are having such an influence on students absolutely need to be doing that work themselves. And we at the college level need to be doing that work ourselves too. Um, I think one of the important principles around intergroup dialogue is that I would never ask students to engage in a process that I am not willing to engage in myself. And we had an opportunity to work with a lot of peer facilitators who were then engaging other students in dialogues. And so in our classes with the facilitators, as they are unpacking what's happening in their classes, they're having a lot of identity understandings and aha moments themselves.
Yeah.
And that would allow dialogue between us as those of us who are faculty and working with the facilitators. And so again, never so that it brings back that this is my learning moment. It's always about the students. But if my narrative can somehow help in the aha of a student that is facilitating other students in dialogue, then I think that's an important thing to share too.
Yeah.
And then I can still have my aha moments over here, but then I'm not putting them onto the students.
What are some things that help you remain accountable to yourself and then also accountable to groups you want to show up in solidarity with when it comes to continuing your own learning and development?
I think my family, um, for one, my son's now 19, seeing what his future prospects are and thinking about the future of young people generally, but he's part of that. It makes me know we have so much work we've got to do, and I've got to be part of the solution in some way. I have this earring that I've had for 30 plus years, and it's a woman's symbol, and I wear it every day. It symbolizes I am not a radical. I work in an institution of higher education, but this is my little reminder to myself every day, and I can always touch it to say, I have to be the one that says the thing in the room, or I have to be the one that asks the question of why are we doing it this way? It's so minor. Most people would never even notice this little earring. But for me, it's like my non-radical way of reminding myself that I've got to stay engaged. I've got to do that. And so that's my little reminder to myself. And I think it is related to my son and my hope and aspiration for the future, that it's better. It's hard to work at an institution like the University of Michigan and see the ups and downs of how we think about and how we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, let alone social justice. And so I have to remain committed. But there's a ton of people around me that are also committed who I look to as reminders that they're way more public than I am doing this work and on the front lines. And so if they can do it, I certainly can do my little part and need to. So I try to remember in that way.
Yeah. Now, when we were talking in preparation for this, one of the things I talked about, and I think is also really prevalent in thinking about our experience in dialogue as well, is socialization. When you're thinking about your experiences with your identities that hold some privilege and was minoritized aspects of your identities, what's your relationship? What has it been and what is it now? Your relationship of resisting internalized oppression as well as those ideas, those experiences of internalized superiority as well. So how are you navigating those things as you move about today?
Yeah. In terms of internalized oppression, I feel like I've done a lot of work over the years, especially around my LGBTQ plus identity. I would say many years ago, I was much um, more hesitant to publicly share who I am as a lesbian. Um, and when I say publicly, walking down the street with my wife and
Mm.
feeling comfortable publicly demonstrating that we're a couple, just in the way that heterosexual couples do all the time. I'm long over that. And adopting was a big part of that because we don't want to teach internalized oppression to our own kid. So
Mhm.
we're only going to do this if we are really comfortable with who we are as a couple, as our identities, and as a family, etc. I think sometimes though it's now so taken for granted, like me and inside me, I forget that it's still meaningful and important from like a mentorship standpoint to be out because I'm just out.
Yeah.
So I tried to now build in intentional ways of making sure people know this about me without saying, let me come out to you. I'm talking about my wife, for example. That's probably the biggest way that I do that as a signal. She's part of the LGBT community. And then anything around um, advocacy for LGBTQ plus students on the campus. Of course, I didn't need to be that advocate, but just really trying to be more purposeful in being out because people sometimes don't know that
Mm.
about me. And I want, especially students, to be able to see someone who has a position of relative power and they can do it and they can be out and it's an okay thing to be who they are. I've tried to, again, I don't think it's based anymore on internalized oppression, but this recognition of, yeah, I still need to be
Yeah.
intentional. The internalized superiority is probably harder. Um, I've talked about ways that I've tried to use my white privilege to advantage my family, but also that are set up to benefit people of color. I also identify as upper middle to maybe even upper class at this point in my life. And that's what I'm still trying to figure out. What is the influence of that? I, of course, try not to take for granted what that means for my life. I know I've been in a position to learn a lot about, um, investing and saving and stuff like that. And I have tried to, when it's welcome and interpersonally, do some financial education with friends who have requested that. So trying to expand the pool of people that have access to the knowledge about financial literacy. I think
Mhm.
that's important. Um, but I don't know that really speaks to internalized superiority as I think that's one I still need to interrogate a little bit more.
Mhm.
Certainly, I've been around family tables where there's been people made fun of who are lower income and just, no, we're not going to do that. Um, so again, the intentionality around that and just constantly, you got to have it here, not way
Yeah.
back. And so all of my privilege identities, I try to just have them right behind my eyes so that so it's right there. Um, am I successful all the time? No, I'm sure I am not. But I I do my best to make sure that I'm thinking about that. I'm going to be talking to a group tonight about voting, student group, and it is nonpartisan for sure, just getting out the vote.
Mhm.
But absolutely, all it's tied to how to make the pie bigger for everybody and
Yeah.
which candidates are really thinking broadly about bringing more people into opportunities than trying to keep people out. And I hope a lot of people are doing that. That's how I try to just interrogate that sense of entitlement. If I'm feeling it, I need to whack myself a little bit and reopen my eyes again to what's going on here? Where's that coming from?
One of the things that came up for me in terms of the financial literacy piece is like in class itself, it's one of those things that for some folks it can shift and change over time. But yeah, just the importance of that for many folks. I know just particularly for me, one of the things that the class piece sometimes would come up is just sometimes forgetting or even if I don't forget, just being reminded of things, particularly back when I was working in higher education. It's around the end of the year, these relatively, in my experience, longer stretches of time to have vacation and things towards the end of the year, and just working with other folks and knowing other folks in my context that are like, "Wait, if I don't show up and clock in, I'm not getting paid. You're telling me you can still expect a salary and you're not in the place or you're not doing the things." And so just
Oh,
reminders in some ways of just the things and the shifts, changes and shifts sometimes even that class can provide among many other things. What's something that you can think of that maybe a moment of memory, thought, something that
yeah.
reminded you, "Yeah, this is what I'm talking about. Like, yeah, this is why I do it every day."
Yeah. I would say when I was doing intergroup dialogue, that was really easy because it was like the transformation and awakening that I saw in students. Um, Not necessarily every day, but every semester, I definitely saw that happening, and to a variety of students from a variety of backgrounds and identities. So that was for sure, that made it worth it day in and day out. Um, but many people have asked me, "So why did you go into, like, more full-time administration?" Because I don't have those, "Oh, like, see it. I see you struggling, and then I see you, like, making sense of what this and that's so exciting to see that, and I don't get anymore. But I have a different opportunity. So I think I now have the 30,000 foot view of higher education and policy and the impact that can have on many lives. I work with a program that's a scholarship program for first generation and low income students. One of the things that the director and I have talked about is how do we get rid of the debt, the taking out of loans? We can provide the scholarship up to this much, but then they might still have to have a loan. Can we provide it so that they don't even have to take out any loans? And we looked at it and we could do that. And instead of being the last end where they've got the loan and then they still have this much unmet need, we've talked about the whole including the loan as the unmet need. And so I love to be in those situations where we can shift the policy and it's going to impact a lot of students. And I'm never going to hear from them. I'm never going to see how it impacts them that they don't have a loan throughout college. But I know that impact is really great. I like being in those spaces too, where we can really think differently about our policies and our procedures. And I can also still some programs. So we're doing these departmental action teams for equitable teaching. So a lot of times in colleges and universities will have these like a community of practice where people, scholars and faculty come together and learn about a topic and maybe go back and change their course and that sort of thing. But these are departmentally focused so that the impact is going to be in a department. The department is going to be changed, not just the individual faculty member.
Okay.
And there are undergraduate students on these teams, which I think is really critical because sometimes faculty talk among faculty and we don't quite get it. Undergraduate experiences. The students are part of these teams. Everybody on the team's getting paid because this is additional work. It's not volunteer work that they should do in addition to everything else that they're doing. And I was able to lead a team to create this project and program on our campus, and we're piloting it this year.
That's
Am I going to
incredible.
see the benefits of that? Maybe I'll be able to see some data that shows a difference in graduation outcomes and that sort of thing. But it's not the same as seeing the student have the aha moment. But it's still exciting. And it probably impacts more students than when I see that interpersonal interaction with one or two students. I have appreciated being able to have a larger impact, even if I don't quite see the benefits firsthand.
Seeing the loan as the unmet need, that's a really important shift in understanding. And then being able to organize your resources around trying to support that and being in conversation about how can we organize our resources to try to address that part. Because the many things that students have in their minds and have to hold on to as they try to go about their academics and just finish their education, for some of our students, just the load that extra financial burden carries and the things that, folks have to navigate to try to meet those needs. And so hearing that you all are trying to put that into as a focus of it, like how can we try to make it to where that loan and even in itself is an unmet need, and how can we address that? That's really important. I will sometimes hear folks say, "Oh yeah, we have the same 24 hours." We don't have the same 24 hours, but when I think of
Right.
just that financial example as one of them, like there's a whole host of things you have to keep in your mind and perhaps organize your day to try to meet those needs when you have to attend to that financial burden as opposed to somebody who does not.
Let me be clear. There are a ton of people that are involved in
Absolutely.
making that happen, but just to be able to say, "Green light, let's figure out if we can do this and how," then it facilitates these other conversations.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I wanna just make sure it is a team.
Yeah.
It's not me that even does most of these things, but
Hmm.
it's being in a position to remove the barriers and see what's possible and say yes
Hmm.
to removing those barriers. That's very rewarding.
So the previous question was, what are some of those things that remind you or just, oh yeah, this is why I do it? And so now this question, this follow-up question here is, what is it or what is something or things, depending on how much you want to share a name, but keep you up at night, figuratively or literally, but could be, oh, the field really needs this, like the higher education really needs this, or society really needs this, or oh, here's a question or something I've been working on that it's just a sort of a burning question that I've been trying to figure out all this time. But what's something that keeps you up at night, if that makes sense? And again, literally or figuratively, in terms of something that you're really concerned about and something you'd like to see some movement on.
Yeah, I could say a bunch about the direction of our nation, but let me keep it a little more focused on higher education. I'm really struggling with institutional neutrality, um, which a lot of campuses, including my own, are really adopting neutral positions around societal issues. In one sense, there's a part of me that can understand that for free expression to happen, if the institution takes a perspective, then that shuts out a bunch of people who might not say what they want to say because they're afraid the institution has made a statement in the opposite way. So I'm trying to hold that with what I think is happening, which is more like a suppression of speech when things are really out of whack or there's a disproportionate response to a societal issue. Gaza, in particular, is probably, I think, what is causing a lot of institutions to take this stand. And I if they're taking it for the former thing, I don't necessarily disagree, but it feels really much on the heels of having a disproportionate stance on this particular issue. And it that to me feels wrong. And so, and then again, being of the institution, so this institutional neutrality policy belongs to me now. I'm under the guise of this. And so what does that mean? To speak out against the policy or just speak out against for or against anything else.
Yeah.
I'm always careful because I understand I am part of an administration at a university, but this feels really different. And so I'm trying to navigate that, and I haven't figured it out for myself. I will say for the Difficult Dialogues National Resource Center, we are struggling with this issue too, because probably since 2020 and George Floyd's murder, we as an organization have been um, thinking about when things like this happen, and there are many things that have happened since 2020 and before, but we started thinking, oh, do we make a statement when this happens as an organization that has a social justice mission, but we also have a dialogue mission. And so what does that mean if we take a stand? Can we offer true opportunities for dialogue if we've, as an organization, said we believe this, and
Mhm.
anybody going to come to the table that doesn't believe that? And then are we truly having dialogue? So the implications for us as an organization are things that we're wrestling with as a board right now, and we haven't resolved that. We're not a neutral organization. We clearly aren't. We stand for justice and equity,
Mhm.
But in dialogue, if we really want to bring people together in dialogue, should we publicly take a stance on different things? I don't know. Do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah. I'll tell you my immediate thought on it based on what you shared. One of the parts about this question, I'm glad you responded, and it's not to have it all figured out because it's really just really about like one of those. What are those things that are keeping me awake or keeping me up, or things that I'm really thinking through and trying to figure out, things that aren't easy to navigate. So I appreciate you sharing that. My immediate answer to your question, I'm just recently, literally this past Sunday, wrapping up the second course of our intergroup dialogue course and talking about multi-partiality. My initial response is recognizing that we do need all of the narrative. So we need the dominant narrative to be in place in dialogue, and we also need those counter narratives and do it in a way. And you talked about this before, where it's like we're not interrogating anyone. We're trying to balance that social power. But a part of multi-partiality and recognizing that to me is also the recognition that some narratives, for us to get a more complete picture, some narratives need to be challenged more than others. We need to hear those dominant narratives so that we know how we've all been impacted by them. And yeah, some of them need to be challenged more than others. There's a whole organizational history segment of this too. So we're talking about your own social justice origin story right now. But if at some point, I'm definitely interested in it, if you and others perhaps might be down to talk about it, like the origins of the difficult dialogues National Resource
Oh,
Center. If you want to get some people in and we talk about how
and
that
few
came to be
people,
and things,
yeah.
I would love that. My immediate response is just recognizing like, yeah, some narratives need to be challenged more than others, but we also need all the perspectives to be there. So I hear the struggle and I feel it in some ways in your sharing, and a part of me feels like, yeah, we can share what our stance is, and also here's what the larger model of the work that we're trying to do is, and we're still willing to engage folks in that. Here's the impact of these larger narratives on people's life and lived experience.
Yeah.
And so I'm not saying like it's necessarily an easy thing, but the thing that I came to is just, yeah, we need folks to talk about like meritocracy. We need folks to come in with those experiences of I've experienced hardship too, and for some of these reasons that may not necessarily be aware of the ways that other people might be struggling and suffering. But we need y'all to be able to talk about these different things. And I'm also hearing, okay, but if we share that, will folks even show up to the table?
That's my
Will that
great.
preemptively stop them from
Right.
participating? Yeah.
Yeah, we have to hear in terms of multi-partiality.
Yeah, yeah.
We have those voices that are often minimized in these conversations. But if the organization has put out this statement, will those folks from the dominant narrative ever get into the room
Hmm.
to then have that dialogic experience? So that's where I'm really struggling. But I hear you saying maybe lean into that. You still need both, but the multi-partiality piece.
The multi-partiality piece is there. And I feel like, Kelly, I'm just thinking about it, but I feel like in that too, because you are a values-led organization, and I feel like by naming that, yes, it could communicate who you are and what your social justice orientation is. And there may also be folks who share different identities that you may be taking a particular stance on that implicates aspects of their identity, but who may, in their own journey or lived experience, also recognize the inequity that exists and may be on their own journey of trying to act in solidarity in different ways. I'm connecting a lot of dots here that take time and experience for people, but I do feel like it exists as there's some folks who are on that journey who also recognize the inequity that exists. I'll come to the table, and in my thinking immediately here right now, you can let me know how you feel about it or not, but perhaps those folks then may be able to go back into their communities in which they have some closer affinity and be able to utilize some of the things they are learning to then support. So some of it for me is sometimes it's this feeling I sometimes get, Kelly, is sometimes I'm not the one to do it. I might not be the one to change the mind or to elevate the thing. What we have done here, if there are other folks who might have a closer proximity than I do, if
Mhm.
they're having an experience where they then can take that. And I've seen that in dialogue too. Is yeah, folks might not necessarily listen to me in a way that it resonates, but then the folks who were in the space have taken something from what I've shared and they can then go back and do that in ways that I might not be able.
In talking with alums,
Yeah.
a program, I hear that all the time. I just heard from someone who is now a physician. She started out as an undergrad, and
Love this.
and she just messaged me on LinkedIn just this week and is talking about how she's developing a kind of a professional development thing for her physician colleagues. She is utilizing some of this dialogic kind of work in her work with other physicians. I love hearing how even years later, this is still something that people are thinking about. And not just thinking about, they're utilizing it in their work and in their life.
Mhm.
So,
And I'm just gonna put it out there. I really want to talk to y'all too, and no pressure to say, yes. In this conversation that we're having now, it's just reminding me one of the things I so much appreciated about dialogue, in my experience, as opposed to other forms of communication, or sometimes I'll hear in higher education. I don't know what degrees you still hear it among in the circles you're in, but conversations about civility and like those sorts of
mm,
things, is that
yeah,
for me, dialogue was pretty unique in that it acknowledged those different power
yeah,
dynamics and things that influence how we are experiencing a physical space, how we experience the world around us, in that,
yeah,
in ways where some other ways of engaging communicated, oh yeah, let's come together and talk about this difficult topic, absent any kind of context
one-
of the ways that we're situated differently in the space. And so I believe in what y'all doing. I think one of the main points of conflict here is about with those folks that are not in that space that we might be in. How do we get them there? I
right,
just feel like, yeah, communicating that thing, whatever your message is. Perhaps there may be folks who share some affinity again or some similar identity, and who may be in a privileged position in regards to what's happening, and may also say, oh yeah, this is wrong for me too. Let me come check this out. And then maybe they can do it. But again, that's me connecting a lot of dots. And it's not,
uh,
I'm not saying it's easy, but it's the immediate thing that came to my mind. Sometimes some stuff got to be
right.
challenged more than others.
Dialogue that is devoid of understanding the power dynamics that are happening
Yeah.
is not the kind of dialogue I'm engaged in or want to be engaged in. I think there's a total missing piece to pretend that everybody that comes to this room to discuss something difficult has the same amount of contextual power behind them or even in the room, the roles that they have, on the identities that they bring, the histories of those identities that all enter the room. If we're not thinking about that, it's not happening the
Mhm,
right way. It
mhm.
just doesn't. And as facilitators of those conversations, if we're not thinking about that, then we're facilitating a discussion. It isn't dialogue.
Yeah.
And not being reflexive of our own stuff too, then really we've missed the point of facilitation in dialogic context.
Mhm. I appreciate you. I'll
Yeah.
just say, just underlining all of that, I just appreciated the distinctions in dialogue around the recognition of the power dynamics piece. So, yeah.
Thanks for going down that road with me a little bit,
Yeah.
helping me sort this out.
And appreciate everything that y'all are doing too. Who or what would you name in terms of people or things that have shaped your analysis and actions in the work that you do now? It could be mentors, books, experiences.
I'd mentioned my early mentor, Dr. Jesus Trevino. He was really foundational in helping me understand dialogue and social justice and introducing me to various models of dialogue and giving me opportunities to facilitate dialogue probably before I was really ready to do that. But he believed in me, and I hope I've done him proud in my career to build on the work that I learned from him. Dr. Patricia Gurin is one of the founders of the program on intergroup relations here at Michigan. And she was someone that i- had the power to be in the room to make things happen. For most of that time, she wasn't the dialogue facilitator, or she wasn't training dialogue facilitators, but she removes those barriers that I was talking about earlier. I had a really good mentor to see how you do that when you have some amount of power, institutional power, how you can get things done in a way that is socially just or social justice oriented, however you want to say it. And then, of course, my colleagues, Moneta Thompson, Roger Fisher, all the folks that I worked with over the years in IGR, such an amazing impact on who I am as a facilitator and what I have learned from them. Um, and then my colleagues at the board of the Difficult Dialogues National Resource Center, many of whom have connections to Michigan, but are now doing this kind of dialogue work in very different institutional settings and yet have made it work. And they've used their context to be able to create something that didn't exist before. And so I love that it's expanded beyond whatever the Michigan model is, it to be the Penn model, the Cal State system model, the Colorado Pueblo model. These are just some of the people that I work with in their institutions. I have learned so much ab- about doing dialogue in other spaces too. And then, of course, having my Race Matters experience, which was completely community dialogue oriented and not affiliated with the university at all. So, seeing the practice, all those people had such an impact on who I am, both their stories, but then how they did their work and what I learned from them in that process.
Mhm.
I'm sure there's lots and lots of books, both on around intergroup dialogue, the Dialogue Across Differences book, which I was part of the multi-university research study that led to that book. I learned so much about research, but about doing justice-minded research in a cross-university study. That was an important learning experience for me. Because it's one thing to do the work of dialogue. It's another thing to be an administrator that is removing barriers to making sure other people do that work. And then it's a third thing to be studying that in a way that acknowledges power and does some of the same things that we're trying to do in a dialogue around multi-partiality, but in a research setting. And that it looks different and plays out differently, but with some of those same principles. So I loved being part of learning from so many people at different stages of their careers. I was still at that point pretty early career. And so just soaking in from these experts how to do this was an amazing opportunity.
Finish the statement. True social justice is possible when.
True social justice is possible when everyone has opportunities that everybody else has, giving everyone the same types of opportunities and really opportunities for the same outcomes, because it's not always about inputs that just make it the same. It's really about the outputs. And so recognizing that power is always going to impact the inputs, and we've got to work to mitigate that so that everybody can have the outcomes that is achievable for every single group.
My approach to social justice is shaped by.
Oh, it's certainly shaped by intergroup dialogue. Our whole conversation has been about the influence of dialogue on my life. And so it's how I approach, even as an administrator, how do I use those dialogic skills of listening and perspective taking and reflexivity, et cetera, to really enact change.
If you have any thoughts for the next generation, what would you want them to know?
Explore, explore. And I think Gen Zers are exploring. So it's not like I'm saying anything new to them, but really eh, be okay being in conversation with people who have different perspectives. I think one thing that has happened since COVID and the tumult in our world is that sometimes we really hesitate to have those conversations with people who think vastly differently than us. But we need to if we're going to get everybody on board toward that goal that I was talking about in the first prompt, we can't just leave them aside and pretend they don't exist. We're going to have to engage them and find a way to do that where we too are listening and that they are listening as well. Gen Z is not one monolith of the us versus the them, but exploring those hard conversations that have to happen across different groups and not being afraid of that.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Kelly. Thank you for spending time with me and sharing your story.
Thank you so much, Rolando. It's been a pleasure, really an honor to spend some time with you.
Absolutely. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review and subscribe to Social Justice Origin Stories wherever you get your podcasts. You can also watch video episodes on YouTube at Social Justice Origin Stories, and I'd really appreciate it if you subscribe there as well. Video episodes are also available on the project website, socialjusticeoriginstories.com. I'd love to hear about how you're engaging with the stories. Share your thoughts at socialjusticeoriginstories.com/contact or by emailing stories@socialjusticeoriginstories.com. To support the work of Social Justice Origin Stories, consider becoming a monthly patron. Your contributions will help keep this research going and support its mission. Visit patreon.com/socialjusticeoriginstories to learn more and make a contribution. Again, that's patreon.com/socialjusticeoriginstories. You can start or stop anytime. Social Justice Origin Stories is edited, hosted, and produced by me, Rolando Thompkins-Jones. Many thanks to our storyteller this week and the many storytellers who have contributed to this project. And thank you for joining me this week. Take care.